There's something about the early 2000s that doesn't translate cleanly into memory. A liminal decade caught in between the analog grime of the 90s and the pristine sheen of the 2010s, where culture spun its wheels and found traction on the unlikeliest asphalt: street racing. Need for Speed Underground 2 was born in this moment. This strange, loud, gaudy moment. And in many ways, it was its truest mirror. A game that didn't just ride the tuner wave, but became the wave's digital scripture. This wasn't just a racing game. It was a coming-of-age story guised as a street racer. Underground 2 didn't tell you how to drive. It asked who you wanted to be when the streets emptied, the city lit up, and the world finally stopped pretending to care about subtlety. It's hard to explain this era to someone who wasn't there, before car culture became social media, before racing meant simulation and esports. There was attitude, the scent of burnt rubber, Mountain Dew Code Red, and when those Guitar Hero KFC meals were around. The belief that identity could be distilled into how you would personify your car. That a Civic with the right spoiler and kit would be an expression of the soul. In this hypercharged moment, EA Black Box wasn't just making racing games. They were curating a scene that would shape not just a generation of car people, but change the scope of what racing games could be forever. But the thing is, Underground 2 was more than just a sequel. It was a manifesto. Where its predecessor flirted with the aesthetics of street culture, Underground 2 committed. If the first game was a mixtape, the second was a concept album. Bigger, louder, moodier, and sprawling with ambition. It traded claustrophobic menus for a whole city. The idea of customization was rewritten for the entirety of racing games. It's been over 20 years since Underground 2 hit the ground running, and more than due time to dive into what is easily one of the most ambitious, influential yet far from perfect racing game sequels of all time. Welcome to my review and retrospective of Need for Speed Underground 2. It's hard to imagine now, in a world where EA's branding machine runs like a metronome, but Need for Speed Underground was a gamble, a rebranding effort so drastic, so violently disconnected from the series' glossy roots and exotic car fantasy, that it nearly felt like a spin-off. Gone were the Lamborghinis and sweeping European vistas. In came the street grime, the JDM underdogs, the glow-stick aesthetics and midnight mayhem. And it worked. Underground was a thunderclap, a commercial and cultural juggernaut that turned a niche into a movement. EA Black Box, the Canadian studio that had proved their mettle with the release of Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2, was tucked inside EA's sprawling structure, and they hit gold. So naturally, the pressure to follow it up was immediate. But not just follow up, surpass, expand, and monetize the mood. The team didn't want to just make Underground 1.5. They'd done the whole linear progression thing. Static menu is a race-by-race unlocks. A garage is a holding pen. It had all worked, and in moments I do prefer the snappy, quickly paced race-to-race style of the original Underground, but it felt like a snapshot. Too small for the energy that they were channeling. For the sequel, the directive was clear. Bigger, but bigger in a way that felt meaningful. Not just more races, but more context, more world. This was the age of open worlds blossoming into mainstream design dogma. GTA 3 had kicked the door open in 2001, and by 2004, San Andreas was about to drop a thermonuclear bomb on everyone's expectations of what a video game map could be. EA was not blind to that, and the writing was on the wall. If you wanted to feel modern, you had to go open. And so they built Bayview, a stitched-together Frankenstein's monster of tuner culture hotspots. From palm-lined beaches to misty industrial sprawl. It wasn't just a track list anymore. It was a city with no pedestrians, no traffic rules, no real inhabitants beyond your rivals. But that wasn't the point. Bayview existed to feel like a space that you had conjured. It was the world's longest, most glorified racetrack disguised as an urban sandbox. Bayview may not be the first racing game open world. Games such as Midnight Club pioneered that concept years before, but they never quite took the same approach, nor, if you're asking me, had the same influence as that of Underground 2. And building that city was no small feat. Development was fast and aggressive. EA, flush with Underground 1's success, pumped resources into the sequel, but with that came expectations. Commercial ones. This wasn't just a team chasing a vision anymore. It was a team navigating a highway with goal markers far higher than ever expected. The devs had to walk a tightrope between authenticity and spectacle, realism and fantasy. Too grounded, and you alienate the escapists. Too fictional, and you lose the credibility of the scene that you're trying to emulate. Their solution? Embrace excess. Stylize everything. Let realism drift out of the corner and slam into a pole. If the physics weren't accurate, Who cares? They felt good. If the customization options were absurd, good. That's the point. The real tuner world might scoff at spinner rims and neon tire glow, but Black Box knew their audience wasn't purists. It was kids with dreams, teenagers scribbling body kits in the backs of notebooks, people who wanted to drive their identity, not just a car. The core of Underground 2's design was built on that adolescent rush of self-expression. The creative leads weren't just asking, how do we make this fun to drive? They were asking, how do we make this feel like yours? Personalization and pushing past what the original Underground gave the player for personalizing their rides was priority, and that led to one of the most exhaustive customization systems ever implemented in a racing game. Hood scoops, engine tuning, vinyl layering, neon underglow, audio setups, magazine covers. It was all there, not just for performance, but for personality, for ego. The garage became a reflection chamber, a place where every mod and sticker applied brought you closer to some imagined version of yourself that you couldn't be in real life. It was chaotic, in a way only early 2000s culture could be. This was the Y2K aesthetic on overdrive, tech-heavy, over-designed, almost alien in that design. The UI was flickering holograms and GPS pulses. Loading screens pulsed like a trance club. Menus weren't clean. They were busy, like club flyers stapled to telephone poles. Information was buried in layers, and that was okay, because style trumped clarity. But this game wasn't built in a vacuum. The developers had reference points. They studied tuner magazines. They pored over Fast and Furious DVDs. They listened to the way that people talked about their builds, the pride, the obsession. They didn't just want to gamify cars. They wanted to gamify belonging. And yet this wasn't an indie passion project. It was a corporate sequel, and it carried the usual footprints. EA wanted monetizable hooks, hence the sponsored product placement. Best Buy garages, singular wireless ads, SUV events that felt completely divorced from the game's aesthetics. None of these decisions were accidents. They were business. And the weird part? It somehow worked. Despite all of the branding sludge, Underground 2 retained its soul. What at the time may have seemed shoehorned in for product placement, now is a time capsule of an era long gone, in all its unusually charming standoutness. That's a testament to EA Black Box's vision. Under the weight of corporate oversight, the team still made something weird and personal, something messy and lovable. Perfect? No, God, far from it. But memorable in a way not just different from the original Underground, not just enough to hold its own identity in an echo chamber, but in a way that superseded both to become one of the most influential and highly revered racing games of all time. They couldn't control everything, of course. Some features were cut. Some systems never fully matured. Game modes cut. In fact, 5 entirely new event types planned for Underground 2's release were abandoned. The first one being Tournament, which were basically just simply groups of standard events, much like the original Underground. Second was Burnout, which was also planned to be in the original Underground and scrapped there. Really just never wanted to make it out, huh? Next was Knockout, also in the original Underground. The most interesting to me, ironically one that we know the least about, was called Car Show, which I'd assume just got reworked into those magazine show-offs in the final product. But I'm curious to see what that would have been like as a more fleshed out event. The last and most unknown is called GT. That's all we know. Maybe another variant of tournaments, one with higher stakes, but who's to say? The open world, while groundbreaking, was ultimately conceptually brilliant and revolutionary, janky as all sin. The story, threadbare, and the voice acting, well, let's just say Brooke Burke wasn't about to win a BAFTA. But none of that mattered, because what they did control, they poured everything into. So yes, the game was built fast. EA gave them just about a year from green light to gold master. That's barely enough time to tune a car, let alone an entire city. But they did it. They took the bones of Underground 1 and built something that didn't just expand, but evolved. Underground 2 wasn't perfect, but it wasn't trying to be. What it was alive. A feeling that you just can't patch in after the fact. Now before I get too deep into things, I want to do some quick housekeeping. I hate plugging myself, but I know that there's plenty of you who would love to help support these videos and keep them coming. So I wanted to remind y'all that I do indeed have a Patreon, which I'll leave a link to in the description if you want to get early access to previews of videos and updates directly from me. As well as that, the lunatics over at GamerSupps somehow decided it was a good idea to give me fuel to keep editing these videos. Like, jokes aside, these flavors hit, and a creator code? Bad idea, guys. Seriously. Now I've got my friends buying cups to make them look like Discord mods. If you're as depraved as they are, you can use my code Ultraviolet to pick up a waifu cup, but for the love of God, stick to some ethical gooning. Better yet, pick up one of those pixel cups instead, or some of their merch. That's enough YouTuber BS for me. I want to genuinely extend a huge thank you to existing patrons and gamer subs for being killer to work with. So let's get right back to the video. For me, the perfect piece of Underground 2 that demonstrates its immediate sense of innovation, while also showcasing that same eagerness also left ideas rough around the edges, is the map. I want to start with the good, because it really is true that games like Underground 2 and Midnight Club were what gave life to open worlds in racing games, and paved the path to the modern day where, you can't find basically any big-name AAA racing games that aren't open world. That aren't track racers, of course. The utilization of Bayview was awesome. The city itself served as your menus to access the game's features. Want a new race? Drive to it. Want to customize? Head to the garage. Want to find a sponsor event? Better start looking around. It was split into a collection of 5 interlocked districts, each with their own aesthetic fingerprint. Beacon Hill, your suburban starting line, all sleepy corners and downtown wannabe nightlife. Jackson Heights, high-altitude serpentines and perpetual fog, hiding technical turns behind foliage and mystery. And honestly, all while looking like the real original concept for Need for Speed Carbon. Cole Harbor, industrial veins pulsing with danger, all steel bridges and claustrophobic underpasses. The airport, city core, the ever-looping freeways between them. It was a labyrinth, one that you had fun learning. At first, it felt slow. You found instant access to idling in backstreets trying to find your next location. But over time, repetition becomes rhythm, streets become second nature. You learned Bayview not through quest markers or fast travel, but through muscle memories. It was the kind of world that didn't need to be massive to feel meaningful. It just needed to be yours. But is it flawless? Haha. God, far from it. Let's talk about the layout, because while I love the idea of how the multitude of districts in Bayview are laid out, there is a massive glaring flaw which puts a tremendous dampener on my overall thoughts of the map as a whole, and it's the highway setup. Navigating on and off the freeway requires a whole PhD in Bayview. It is utterly ridiculous some of the stunts that you have to pull just to navigate off the freeway to get to objectives. Let me point out with the mouse here the route that you have to go, just to hop off of the freeway, without the existence of any shortcuts or extra off-ramps. No, it's just far too locked in and straight cut, and far from the only area of the game's map that suffers from this issue. You know what it reminds me of? A more cluttered and less grid-like version of Burnout Paradise's map. They both allow you to within reason make your own routes in certain events with goal markers around their worlds, and run into a lot of the same problems because of that. However, the main differentiator is Paradise at least has a plethora of different branching paths that lead you to the same spot. Underground 2 feels like it was trying for that same feeling, though of course just years earlier and, well, far more linear and less freeing. And the end result, while ambitious and revolutionary at the time, feels more messy than anything in the modern day. And this is a shame too, because while there are some qualities that Bayview brought forth that I've yet to see another racing game open world do quite as well. Let's talk signage. You can absolutely blast through Bayview, and yet you can count on plenty of road sign signposts to make it very clear where highways lead to, where a paint shop you may not have discovered may lie, and of course, where the districts lead to. Now yes, while the signage is clear and built for racing, it doesn't change what I just mentioned about the map still being a cluttered mess in critical spots. But God, if I can't bring myself to completely hate it. It's flawed, it's groundbreaking, and it's just very impressionable. Think about how many times you'll pass by the fountain shortcut by the casinos, the canyons you'll drift down, the 100 times you'll slam into the train car during drag races by the airport. Love it? I can't completely. Loathe it? I can't say that either. It's the best and worst of Underground 2 all in one, and definitely not the only part of the game like that. If there's something apart from the map that I'd argue that, while creative, was a definite blight, especially as time has gone on, is the career in Underground 2. Look, I remember this far more fondly than in actuality, probably due to how unique the comic style presentation is, especially for the time period. But once you look past that, and look closer, and the glue and the connective tissue between them just doesn't click. I'm the first one to admit that Underground 1 is far from perfect, what with its drawn-out pacing at moments, heavy difficulty spikes, and eccentric CGI cutscenes. And even then, it somehow remained more consistent and engaging. Let me try and go through and explain. The game picks up where Underground 1 left off. You're fresh off your victory, the nameless driver who toppled the city's racing hierarchy. But glory doesn't last long. The opening FMV sets the tone. You're betrayed, set up, run off the road, courtesy of one Caleb Reese, a villain so cartoonishly smug he might as well twirl a vinyl-wrapped mustache. Your car, your rep, your place in the world, all gone, left in the dust, and from their wreckage begins the climb. This is Underground 2's coming-of-age story. Not a tale of a street racer ascending to fame, but one of clawing back what was stolen. A fun twist and reversal of what Underground represented. And that hunger permeates the entire campaign, narratively complementing the idea of earning reputation that was lost, style through your car, the identity and personality ripped away at the start, lending it a ludonarrative harmonic touch that the original Underground didn't excel at to the same degree. Bayview isn't a playground anymore, it's a narrative canvas. The city itself becomes your arena of revenge, parceled out district by district as you claw your way back into relevance. Each area begins closed off, hostile, unwelcoming. You have to prove yourself, not just in races, but in presence and style that your rider claims. And that's both a blessing and a curse here, because while yes, the progression to style point system is great on paper, Underground 2 quite literally asks you to turn your cars into a Y2K time capsule of Monster Energy flavored vomit blobs just to get enough style points to unlock new areas. And don't get me started on the final acts of the game and how egregious the things that you have to do to your car are. Look at the one I used to finish the game in. Yeah, this is just not it. The story isn't told through long dialogue sequences or cinematic cutscenes. Instead, it's fed through voicemails, text messages, and whispers in the underground, alongside, of course, the comic strips. A network of sponsors, allies, and informants who nudge you along, most important among them being Rachel. She's your fixer, your guide, your disembodied voice telling you which races to care about and which upgrades to chase. The irony is, she never really does anything, but she feels present, like a friend watching your back. And in a game where you're otherwise a lone wolf in an empty city, her voice matters more than the script she's reading. And then there's Caleb, the big bad, the head of the Street Reapers, Bayview's reigning racing crew. He's not a character so much as a symbol, the face of everything arrogant, corporate, and hollow about tuning culture. His SUV is practically a metaphor in itself, bulky, over-designed, obnoxious, yet undeniably powerful. He doesn't haunt you through dialogue. He doesn't need to. His presence lingers in the city, in the locked doors and the gate-kept races, until finally, you build enough momentum to call him out. But that sounds far more dramatic than in reality. Because if I'm honest, he's kinda one of the most forgettable antagonists in Need for Speed's history. I think a big part of this is the presentation of the narrative here. At least with the CGI sequences of Underground, you get a more apt display of these characters' personality and flair, even if it was a bit cartoonish and comical. With the comic sequences, they feel a bit rushed. They did only, after all, have a year between the two games, so that would easily serve as a reason as to why they took this creative approach, simply hiding development costs and time through another form of presentation. But the result is that genuinely, even after playing through this game twice, I legitimately forgot the name of the antagonist, and what even happens throughout the story, even though it's only been 2 weeks since finished the game and writing this point in the script. Look, I read manga, so the style isn't the issue, and hell, even newer games such as JDM and Motorstorm Apocalypse prove that this can be executed well. In Underground 2, it just wasn't to the fullest extent if you're asking me. The campaign culminates in one last sprint against Caleb, a mano-a-mano throwdown that serves as your exorcism. Beat him and Bayview is yours again. And I'm gonna be honest, it sucks. Look, at the end of the day, I love Underground 2, but this is one of the most lame, lackluster, and forgettable final races in Need for Speed. It's not just that Caleb sucks, but there's almost no natural build-up, no iconic car to chase after and win. It's just kinda bleh. So you combine that with the stupendously drawn-out final act of the game, and yeah, I can't exactly say I love the way this game concludes at all. What Underground 2 lacks in dialogue and story, it certainly compensates for in structure. And with that being said, I want to talk about the gameplay of the career here. If you played the original Underground, then you're pretty much getting the same here. Races and drag play virtually identically, though with the addition of these street cross events, which honestly kinda suck. They're just normal races on drift tracks pretty much, and your nitrous is taken away, mixed with the AI being its absolute worst, and yeah, there really is very much to like about them. Drift does have some really cool new features, such as the mountain drift sprint, which it's pretty clear and cut we're testing the waters for carbon. They're great, but apart from those though, if you play drift events in One Need for Speed, you've basically played them all. Stupid easy, not much to them, but they're a fun change of pace from just racing constantly. What sets Underground apart, if you're asking me, is when you're not competing in the traditional sense. Most prominently, the magazine events. Sure, they can be a bit of a maze to get around the map sometimes, but the reward is one of the coolest tie-ins of the era car culture ever.
The ability to pose and show off your builds to your heart's content. Sure, some of these magazine or DVD covers will be scripted and just use your build in a set position, but others, man, you choose everything. From the speed of the roller, if you want your doors open, wheel position. That was creativity, the kind that you just don't see in this day and age. And a great improvement on an otherwise pretty mediocre concept in the original Underground. There's a few more small little notes, both good and bad, that I wanted to add at the end here. First, I don't know if this is just results of the game running on modern hardware, but I had the AI just fall from the ceiling quite a few times. Roaming races are a feature which, while cool, I guess, I wish were tied into the narrative and core loop a bit more. It's really unclear just how important they are, and would have been neat to see them turned into mini-bosses or something. Lastly, the tracks themselves lack a lot of the jank of Underground 1. What with its inconsistent jumps and hills, side streets you could accidentally get pushed into, and replaced with these new series' famous arrows dropping off diverging routes, leading to a far less frustrating experience overall in Underground 2. I also look towards aspects such as sponsors. Great idea. Super neat. Except for the fact that I just felt no damn difference and honestly forgot they existed until the game would tell me that I unlocked a new one. So in the end, a step forwards, in many ways, yeah. But the actualization of concept vision to end result is, if you're asking me, just not as strong as the original Underground's linearity. That game was addictingly snappy and fast-paced. Lost some steam near the end, yes, but was far more consistent. Underground 2 was far more risky, and in many ways that paid off. I mean, come on. The diversity of content here. There's even racetracks built into the main career, something plenty of other open-world racers took decades to incorporate. But in plenty of other ways, this game has hampered itself from true greatness. If Underground 2 is remembered for one thing above all else, it isn't the open world, the villain, or even the soundtrack. It's the customization and dedication to the ultimate street racing fantasy. The dizzying, unashamedly maximalist approach to tuning a car into your car. This was the crown jewel, the reason the game still burns neon bright in the collective memory of a generation. Before Underground, car customization in mainstream racing games was largely a matter of performance. It was about efficiency, shaving seconds, becoming competitive. But Black Box realized something revolutionary. In the tuner scene, performance is only half the story. The other half? Identity. And so they built an upgrade and customization system that didn't just make your car faster, it made it yours. And in ways nothing else dares to try. Custom gauges for the UI, nitrous purges, hydraulics, tints, and neon galore, scissor doors, split hoods, trunk audio system setups. And then you could still go wild with performance parts, choose brands to suit the make and model, chuck your ride on a dyno and perfect it for different styles, go nuts with the vinyl editor, and then go blast Rise Against on your way to the next event in this world. Nothing even came close to Underground 2's personalization. The game never once laughed at you for picking clashing colors or over-the-top mods. It leaned in. It said, yeah, go nuts. And in that acceptance, you found freedom. The car list itself was pretty good. But if I'm being honest, I really do wish it did more to differentiate itself from the first game. And while the addition of SUVs was neat, I guess, they wound up being pretty useless. I personally would have loved to have seen the addition of far more sports cars, not even anything crazy like Lamborghini or Ferrari, but Porsches, Corvettes, and the more attainable dream car crowds would have fit the theme of expanding on the first game so much more, and just provided a more engaging car list as a whole. But I suppose at the end of the day, that torch was passed to most wanted. The cars then, a beautiful way to act as a metaphor for what Underground 2's mission was. Be more, do more, but still at the end of the day, be underground. And that's where I want to transition to my conclusion. Need for Speed Underground 2 isn't a perfect game, but it's a special one. What makes it stand out even after all of these years isn't its story or its racing physics. It's the way it captured a moment in time. The early 2000s obsession with tuner culture, neon, and the self-expression on four wheels was bottled up and turned into something that you can play. Something that you could be a part of. The open world of Bayview wasn't the most detailed and the most alive, but it gave you a sense of freedom that was rare for racing games back then. The customization system was over the top, sometimes messy, but it gave everyone the chance to make a car that felt like their own. And the races themselves, whether sprints, circus, or drifting through the mountains, tied it all together. Other racing games have been faster, prettier, and more technologically advanced, but very few have managed to hit the same balance between performance and personality. And that's why Underground 2 still comes up in conversations about the best entries in the series. It wasn't about winning races, it wasn't about being perfect. It
It was about having fun with cars, about expression, and living inside a particular style of street racing fantasy. Looking back, Underground 2 still feels like lightning in a bottle, a game that couldn't have existed before its time and hasn't been replicated since. That's why people still remember it, and why it continues to matter as an imperfect icon.